You are listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needham. Hi gang, Donna here. Thanks for tuning into the Better 2 podcast. Today's guest is Helen Zuman, and she wrote a book called Mating in Captivity. You might be wondering what captivity is. Well, captivity for her was joining a cult. She had just graduated from Harvard, and she was looking for something different. While most people were looking for a normal everyday job, she was looking for something to be a journey, something that was going to be creative. The thing is, it didn't look like a cult from the outside looking in. In fact, it took a while. When she first got there, she said she had a reaction. She felt something in her gut. And, well, you know what they always say, trust your gut. Well, she didn't. And she spent quite a few years there. And while it seems like it might have been a dark place, she says she has no regrets about it. But there is a journey there. There's a journey to be told of what she went through and how her life changed and how it shaped who she is. So without further ado, check it out. Hi, Helen. How are you doing today?
Hey, Donna. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So you have an interesting story, and I read one of your blog posts. I'm going to just jump right in. I read one of your blog posts about sex cults.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess let's go into a little bit of your history, because this is definitely something we're going to be dealing with, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? How did you end up in a cult? I guess that's the first question to start with. Were you young, impressionable, and not so great home life? What led you to this?
Yeah, I would say the basic thing that led me into this cult was being in a space between stories. I graduated from Harvard in 1999 with a degree in visual art and a grant to explore intentional communities where people grew their own food and built their own buildings and stuff like that. And I was interested in this partly because of an experience I'd had my last year in college of living in an off-campus co-op with kind of a hippie vibe. It was where the misfits gathered. And that was the first place I had felt like I belonged. So I was kind of looking for a semi-permanent version of that. But also, when I looked around at my classmates who were off to become, bankers and consultants and lawyers and such, I just didn't see myself. None of it made sense to me. In my perception, all of those jobs, really having a career at all, was just a way to keep the world devouring machine going as it always had. And I wanted to get out of that machine and do something else. And so I set out on this quest, and I visited a number of communities out west and one in New York City where I grew up. And so I was searching and not really finding any place that I was especially drawn to. And then about 4.5 months after I graduated, this was in October of 1999, I found in this book called The Communities Directory a listing for Zendik Farm, also known as the Zendik Farm Arts Foundation. And in the listing, it said it was mostly young people there. That was cool. I was fresh out of college. It said they did all kinds of art and also farming. So I could learn practical skills, but continue my artistic journey. And they had apprenticeships, so they knew what to do with people, whereas other places I had gone didn't necessarily know what to do with me, or just really weren't that interested in expansion. So all those things were, pretty attractive to me. And I called up, I had a conversation with someone who lived there. I asked some questions. I thought I was being smart. I got some pretty vague answers to my questions, but they didn't set off alarm bells because I didn't know what to look for. And then I bought a Greyhound bus ticket from New York City down to Hendersonville, North Carolina, and got a ride out to Zendik Farm out there in the backwoods. So, and of course, at the time that I made these arrangements and went on this trip, I had no idea it was a cult. I thought it was a bunch of revolutionaries who, lived on a farm and grew their own food. So that's what I thought I was signing up for.
There's a lot of things out there like that. I mean, for the people that say, "Oh, look, you can travel if you sell magazine subscriptions," and they do this to younger people because the younger person is looking for a different situation that they're in. So what did your family think about it? Because you were already in college, you graduated from college, did they really have any say?
No, they didn't really have any say. And certainly at first they were fine with it. I mean, no one was really concerned. Like, this was sort of how I was. And as far as they knew and as far as I knew, there was not a problem. It was just later on when I got, super involved in this group and super devoted to it and started really, I would say, energetically and emotionally cutting myself off from them and kind of becoming a different person and adopting a different language and all that, then of course they got concerned.
Yeah. I remember I had just moved to Texas with one of my friends, and she saw an ad, and it ended up boiling it down. It was Scientology. And we had gone to this person's house, and they did the big sales pitch, and they're like, "Oh, well, your life could be so much better." And, both of us kind of just, no. Here's how serious they are about people. I moved from Dallas. I moved to Indiana. I moved to New Orleans. I moved back to Chicago. It took, now this was 1990 or 1989 when I approached them. I finally had to send them a letter again saying cease and desist back in 2005.
Wow.
Because they were still sending me mailings. It's like, dude, I mean, there's cults and then and some people will say that's a cult, and I'm not going to go there. But when you're that hot for somebody, then you have to be kind of, special.
Yeah.
So what made you, so you're there now, you've moved, you've gone there. How long did it take you to realize that maybe this isn't right? Or was it the outside sources that kind of said, hey, this isn't right?
Well, when I first arrived, I had moments of extreme distress very early on. I remember in particular one moment I was out on a work crew. Basically, as soon as I got there, I was put to work, and I just, worked kind of all day, every day, except when there were meetings or things like that. But I remember being out in a work crew, and maybe someone had talked to me in a contemptuous way, or maybe I just didn't understand like what the hell I was doing or why this mattered. But I remember going back to my space and being furious and crying and writing in capital letters in my notebook, "I'm not made for slaughter." And I think what I meant by that was I just feel like an animal in a CAFO, like I particularly don't matter. I'm a lump of labor, So I remember that moment very clearly. And certainly when I first arrived, I had other doubts. They said they were starting a revolution, but they listened to Metallica, and I was like, well, that's pretty sold out. I don't really believe you. But none of those moments, none of those doubts added up to anything serious enough to get me to really question what I was doing. And I was surrounded by people who were true believers in this philosophy and this story. So it was much easier to allow my doubts to be dissolved than to hang on to them. Also, a couple of weeks after I arrived, I gave the Zendiks all my money. So, and once I did that, then I was really invested in making this decision right. So I actually didn't seriously have doubts about Zendik, as in like, this is fucked up and I'm getting out, until more than a year after I physically departed.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, at the time that I departed, I was still a true believer. I got kicked out. And when I got kicked out, there was this tiny part of me that was excited and relieved because no one would be watching me, you know, for the first time in 5 years. But my dominant feeling was just despair and doom and failure. That's where I was at when I physically left. And then I went on a whole bunch of adventures thinking, per Zendic philosophy, that I needed to go out into the death culture, which is what we call the outside world, and mow down my fantasies about how life could be good somewhere other than Zendic, so that I would get desperate enough to go back and fully commit. So that's kind of what I set out to do. At the same time, I did acknowledge to myself that if I went out into the world with the desire to get back to Zendic, knowing, thinking that I had to do that, it was going to suck. So I did, in a sense, also set myself free. I was like, I'm going out into the world. I can't guarantee that I'll ever make it back here. Maybe this is all there is for me, and I might have to accept that. So I had that idea going, and I had the mowing down fantasies idea going. But the fact was, I was out in the world. I was relying on other people, and if I wanted friendship or if I wanted emotional sustenance, I was having to get that from other people. And so I think that kind of helped to erode my absolute dependence on Zendic, and also just gave me a taste of non-abusive relationships, Not that I hadn't had those before Zendic, and not that everything about Zendic was abusive, but I just, I once again had the experience of being with people whose default was to be kind and respectful. And so that I sort of worked that into my body, I think. And so there were a lot of things that kind of were gradually working on me in that first year that I was gone. And then it was about, I think it was 14 months after I left, when I was kind of prepared for a new thought beyond the binary of either I go back or I'm miserable for the rest of my life. I encountered a friend who had left Zendic about 6 months after I had, and she had gotten the cult memo, and we had a watershed conversation in which we basically retold the story of Zendic, whereas my old story had been, well, I didn't make it there because like I'm a loser. The new story was, oh yeah, I didn't make it there because it was a fucked up place, So that was my big revelatory moment, after which I felt absolutely elated and just thrilled to be free and back in the world again and able to love the people I loved.
Did you have to go through any deprogramming per se?
No, I mean, I would say I really just did that myself. And I really think about being in a cult as being trapped in a story, and it's a story that I didn't come up with the story. It was there before I arrived, but I learned it and I co-created it and I built it and I kept it going, and I certainly made it a part of myself. However, I was also aware, especially once I left, of like the weight of this story and the suffering that I was enduring while carrying it around. And so when someone came along and offered me a more compelling story, a story that set me free and just like eliminated this binary, I was like, hell yeah, And then after that, there was still work to do, and especially in the next couple months, I had moments of just feeling like I was back in my old Zendic self and panicking about what the people who still live there were thinking about me. Kind of flashbacks like those happened, but over time, they grew less and less frequent and less powerful. And I think also I very much composted this experience through talking with other former Zendics, hours and hours of conversation, and also writing about the experience. And over a long period of time, and many drafts of my memoir about it, recasting it from something that happened to me at the hands of this evil bitch Errol, who was the leader of the group, and into something that I participated in, not in the sense that I invited my own abuse, but just in the sense I went on an adventure. I went looking for something. I went on a journey, and some of what I was looking for I found, and some I didn't find, and I found a lot of stuff I didn't expect. And all of it, you know, I have the power to compost all that stinky guck into a source of fertility and decide what I want to learn from it, and, you know, what I want to take with me.
Do you think in general that cults prey on the people that are looking for something different, that are looking for a sense of community?
Yes, I think that is a common thing that would attract a person to a cult. I think also, though, there's another couple things. One is that from what I have read and heard, and this also, you know, bears out my own experience and the experience of people I know from Zendik, that the most common predictor of whether you will enter a cult or not is being in what I call the space between stories, being in an in-between time where you're not super committed to one thing or another. Maybe you just got divorced or graduated from college or lost your job or something. You're untethered and you're open to something new. And another thing is that cults, sure, sometimes they attract or, you know, are willing to take in, like, you know, wandering lost souls, but they also want people who are high functioning and skilled and capable of commitment and devotion, so that those people can kick butt, you know, for the goals of the organization.
Okay. So was there any, I'm trying to put this lightly, was there any sexual abuse in this place?
Well, yeah, there was. And it was embedded in this whole sexual schema, this whole philosophy about sex and relationships. So Wolf and Errol were the two people who started the farm. They were a couple. They started it in 1969. And they believed that to be honest with each other, two people in a couple needed to be part of a culture where everyone else was being honest as well. And that's what they thought they were creating. So according to the Zendik story, Errol and Wolf were the only two people in the history of the planet who'd ever had an honest relationship with each other. Like, in the outside world, everyone was lying all the time because they didn't have support. And in the outside world, if you're, like, for example, a husband and wife, like, you're just so worried about losing each other's support in the fight for survival that you're just bullshitting all the time. So according to Zendik, the only way then for me to have an honest relationship, to learn how to do that, was to, you know, stay at the farm and apprentice to Errol. Wolf had died by the time I arrived. So that was kind of the basic underpinning. And then the idea that, like, nobody knew how to have a relationship. We all have to learn. So out of that came these, you know, different various rituals associated with sexuality. At the time I arrived, there was a third-party system for arranging sexual assignations, meaning if I was interested in a guy, I would, quote, hit him up through a third party, there were two dating administrators. I could ask either one of them. I would hit this person up either for a walk, which meant, you know, hanging out, making out, talking, kissing, whatever, or a date, which meant going to a secluded spot and having sex, you know, oral or vaginal or whatever. that was one aspect of it, that there were rituals for setting up assignations. There also, the responsibility for birth control was entirely on the women. My theory about that is that Wolf, the founder, wanted to have sex with any woman at any time, and he didn't like condoms. So as a result of that, every time before every date, I would have to go and be checked with a speculum to see if I was, fertile. If I was fertile, I couldn't have sex, and if I wasn't, I could. So there was, that element of control. And then we would have sex meetings where we talked about our sexuality and sexual experiences. And there was a pressure. Sometimes the pressure was subtle and sometimes it was overt, but there was a pressure to report, on what happened, and allow what had happened on your dates to be dissected, often in terms of what was wrong with you and what was wrong with your philosophy. So there was all that. And then in that context, well, it wasn't very friendly to like enthusiastic consent, shall we say, so I mean, I would say that there were instances of serious sexual abuse. But what was more common was just this sense that, my sexuality was not my own, that it belonged first to the group and secondarily to me. And at the same time, actually, the third party system was one of the things that attracted me to the farm initially, because when I arrived there, I had actually never had sex before. I was quite inexperienced, not good at flirting, not good at the mating dance. And so I just thought, well, great, I have a wingman now. It was awesome, So I didn't really understand the implications till later. But I think there were ways in which this system and just being at Zendik did allow me to explore my sexuality in ways that wouldn't have happened in another place. And there were positive aspects to that. And there was absolutely a dark side.
But as long as you can see the positive, that's a blessing. Even if it may have been dark, you do see some positive that came out of it.
Yes, and even the dark side, I don't see as negative. Okay. I just see it as, another part of the story.
So, I mean, in a way, because it's funny, I had a podcast earlier today. I was talking about a lady who basically, her and her husband rejected the white picket fence lifestyle and now travel the country in an RV. They quit their normal jobs and they have jobs now, but they're traveling life. They rejected the norm. And in a way, what you're saying is when you decided to do this, you were kind of rejecting the norm. You didn't want to, even though you were a Harvard graduate, you were educated, you weren't looking for this cookie cutter life. Mm-hmm. You wanted something different. So you've left the cult, you've written a book. What else have you managed to do with your life that, and I know that sounds really weird to be put that way, but what have you done afterwards? What has this experience taught you besides the book? I mean, are you married? Are you living a fulfilled life? Do you still miss the cult? I mean, what is life like now?
Yeah, well, I am married. I think one of the things that kept me at Zendik for as long as I stayed was this promise that I could learn how to have a lasting relationship with a man, which was something that I had always wanted. I never thought about having kids, but I did always think I want to find the love of my life. I want to find him. And I did not find him in Zendik, but about 4 years after I left Zendik, I was looking for a job and I found an ad on Craigslist in New York looking for someone to do deliveries in Manhattan on a giant trike. And so I answered this ad, and I was very leery of actually showing up for my interview because I didn't drive. I had never ridden a bicycle, even a bicycle in Manhattan, and my family was freaking out about my safety. But at the last minute, I discovered that an old friend from Zendik was working for this company. And so I was like, I don't know about this job, but I want to see my friend, so I will go for this interview. And I did. And then I got there and I saw in the office, there was a Zendik sticker. It said, "Stop bitching, start a revolution." I was like, what is going on here? And I thought that my friend had put it there, but actually it was the company's owner, Greg. His business was called Revolution Rickshaws. And so he had gotten the sticker from Zendik in Manhattan because he had started the revolution. Anyway, so Greg was owner of the company. I met him on this interview, and before long I started working for him. Then we started dating. I moved in with him very soon after that, and we got married 10 years ago this Friday. So thank you. And so I really think that, you know, there was a time at Zendik when I gave up. You know, I thought, okay, forget it. I'm just not worthy of this lasting relationship thing. I'm not cut out for it. I'm just going to have to be happy with being loyal to Zendik, and that's going to have to be enough. And I think that trying to give that up was one of the things that made me, I think, lose heart, like unconsciously lose heart, you know, for the cause. But that was something I think I couldn't really give up. And so I, you know, stayed true to that and eventually made that happen for myself. As far as like missing the cult, having a fulfilled life, I mean, there was a certain camaraderie that I experienced there that was wonderful at times, and I miss that, and I miss a lot of the people. I mean, I'm still friends. I'm really good friends with a lot of the people I knew from there, and I do get to visit with them sometimes. But it's a very minor missing, I would say. And I mean, in terms of fulfillment, I mean, looking back now, I moved to Zendik when I was 22, and now I'm 44. It's half a lifetime ago. Really, the theme that I see that runs through that experience and through, you know, the years since I left is just a desire for transformation, for new understandings. Recently, I got involved. I found this podcast called Unfuck Your Brain, and it's connected to a life coaching program, which I joined. And I started to notice, like actually, this is really helpful. I had signed up with life coaches before, but hadn't really felt anything major shift. It was just like, oh, well, they helped me, they believed in me. And then the 3 months ended, and it was back to normal. But this other form of coaching really emphasizes self-coaching, getting to know your own brain, learning how to like trust yourself, which was the number one thing that I think Zendik militated against, was self-trust. And so I really threw myself into this work and found it super helpful, and decided, okay, I'm going to become a life coach. So I will start my certification in November. I decided, like, you know, all right, 22 years ago, I made this big leap in my life I didn't really know that I was making. And, you know, this time I'm going to do it consciously. I'm going to do it on purpose. I'm going to start a new career that's all about, you know, deeply searching and reflecting and gaining new understandings. And another thing that's kind of related to the Zendik experience, but a very different version of it, is in the past 5 years or so, I've developed a relationship with an eco-village in North Carolina. It's only about an hour away from Zendik used to be. It's called Earth Haven. And I found it through someone I knew from Zendik. And I kind of think of it as a place that has all the good stuff that Zendik had without the crap. It's a truly healthy community. And it's also a village. So there's tons of interaction, and in a way, people there function like an extended family in terms of providing mutual aid to each other. So, I go there, when I can, and it's off the grid, and there's alternative toilet situations and food growing and the seasonal rituals and opportunities for hyper local entertainment, just people bringing their own talents. So that's kind of a continuation of the quest, I guess.
Do you still do art?
Yes, but in a different way. When I was in college, I majored in visual art, I think partly because I was terrified of writing. Writing had always been the most important thing to me in terms of artistic expression, but I didn't understand it as a process, and I would get blocked and just torture myself. But I had been making things since I was a kid. I never got stuck there, so I could do that. And then at Zendik, I did some writing, but it always had to be approved by, like, Errol was one who decided if it was good or not. So, I didn't make much progress there. But then after I left and I realized that I had been in a cult, I thought that was miraculous. I thought it was miraculous that I had engaged in this fantastical delusion and it had seemed so real to me, and also miraculous that I had gotten out. And I immediately thought, because I was a writer, I thought, I'm going to write a book. And because this story was so important to me and so compelling to me, I was motivated to learn how to write as a process. So it took me 12 years to write the book. And in those 12 years and all those many drafts and all the obstacles and so on, I did learn writing as a process. And I got to the point where I never get stuck as a writer. That's not a thing. So I guess nowadays my artistry is much more directed toward writing. And sometimes I make things, and my husband and I renovated our house, and there's all kinds of making things that needs to happen in a house like ours. But yeah, I would say writing has become really my main artistic outlet.
So your book, Mating in Captivity, it's all about your experience in the cult, huh?
Yes.
And you call it a neo-hippie cult?
Yeah, well, I call it that because it was started in the late 60s. It was part of the hippie era and the counterculture, the Back to the Land movement. It started, Wolf and Errol moved to some farmland and started gathering people around them. But unlike most of those communal type situations that started in the late 60s and early 70s, Zendik survived. It lasted for 44 years. And so, there were all these vestiges of hippie culture, like, tie-dye and camouflage, tie-dye shirts and camouflage pants, and like men with earrings and, stuff like that. So, and also our lingo, a lot of our jargon was like straight out of the 60s. So yeah, it was a hippie cult that survived into the 21st century.
What was its final death knell?
Well, that was related to Errol's final death knell. Errol died in 2012 of cancer. She and Wolf had one daughter, Fawn, and Fawn was supposed to take over and lead the revolution into the next era. But Fawn had grown up at Zendik. And so from the time she was a little kid, everyone by default saw her as special. So she never really had to learn the skills that Errol had to learn in winning people over to her cause, or just dealing with people, just sort of bringing them along with her. So she wasn't very good at that. And it's also possible that she simply didn't want to lead, that she just wanted to sort of, be married and have her nuclear family. So in the early, in like the the latter part of the first decade of the 21st century, Fawn got married, which was heretical to the Zendik that I knew. As far as according to the Zendik I knew, marriage was utter bullshit. But Errol was having some kind of a breakdown. She was having some mental problems. Fawn was gaining more power than the group. She got married. Then other people got married. There had been very few children. There were only 2 children born in the entire time that I was there. There were not many kids showing up at Zendik, but more people started having kids. The mothers in particular became less enthusiastic about going out in the street and going selling. The financial situation, wasn't great. Also, the farm moved from North Carolina to West Virginia in 2004, and Errol kind of bought at the height of the market. So that was a bad financial move. So, and the population dwindled significantly after the move happened, partly because the farm in North Carolina was near Asheville, was kind of on the hippie highway. The farm in West Virginia was just in the middle of nowhere. It was not a place anyone would come unless they were headed for that particular destination. So the numbers went down, and then after Errol died, from what I heard, there was a moment when, partly because of financial difficulties, there was a moment when all the people who were still there, who had been there for years and years by then, had been like running the place and making the money and tending the animals and doing all the things forever. There was a moment when Fawn could have kept the enterprise together by allowing all those other people a little more power, over the land and the money and such. And she refused to do that. And at that point, everyone else left.
Wow.
And then she and her husband, as far as I know, they still own that property in West Virginia. They still own the main chunk of that property, but they moved away and leased it out. And so Fawn now, she has a husband and she has her children, and it's quite possible that is simply the life that she preferred, and maybe the life that she always preferred.
It's interesting sometimes how families, correct, generational things, how one part of the family is, the quintessential little white picket fence, and the other part of the family is, I'm going to be what I'm going to be.
Yeah.
Do you think, there was that big scandal recently with Allison Mack. I don't remember the cult's name, but the whole sex scandal cult.
Right.
And even the Jeffrey Epstein thing, do you consider that kind of cultish? Because considering the people that were in the position connecting, going to these parties with him, isn't that kind of cultish as well?
Okay, well, as far as Jeffrey Epstein, I don't know a lot about that situation,
okay,
but my guess is, from the little I do know, that the men who were involved in that kind of activity, to be able to do that, they would have needed to step inside a really horrifying story about what was okay. And it would have taken a lot of energy and a lot of reinforcement to feel okay about that, and as far as the women who were involved, I know so little about it, but I would guess there was a fair amount of coercion going on and extremely imbalanced.
It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that sometimes people prey upon the weaker person. And from what I have watched in a documentary and studied about the Epstein case, basically he was offering these girls money and, stuff like that. And when you come from, and he was picking on people that didn't have things, that were very poor. So here you are offering something monetarily, and which also ties into another woman that I've talked to, who she's originally from Zimbabwe. And she was talking about how there, with the larger families, a father will sell his daughter off for a monetary or a cow or whatever to help support the family, and how she's trying to stop that. So it's interesting how once, and this is how I'm tying this back to your story, is the fact that you were talking about your femininity and your feminine power was kind of, I don't want to say trampled on, but you couldn't own it. You couldn't own your sexuality. You couldn't own, and there's different, we always look at certain things as black and white, that there's no bigger picture. But here's your story where you're not going to be able to necessarily claim your feminine power, your sexuality. And here are the same stories of people not being able to claim their power, but it's a totally different way. So it's an interesting thing that when it comes down to feminine power, being empowered is not necessarily always possible, because there are other factors in the world, in different situations, in different countries even. So do you now feel like you've gained your power back, your femininity back, that you can own yourself? And I mean, when I say femininity, I'm not talking about short skirts and makeup and all that other stuff. I'm talking about being a woman, just being a woman that is capable and confident in her own skin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that one of the main quests of my life, going all the way back to when I was in Catholic school and too afraid to ask to go to the bathroom, has been learning to trust myself and to like take decision making power back, and to be like, no, like I decide, I give myself permission or withhold my permission. I'm in charge here, and that's something that I've really been coming to grips with in my current life coaching experience, is just really getting much more acquainted with my thoughts, and with the idea that I don't have to believe all of them, and especially because so many of them, showed up without permission. I didn't choose those things. I didn't choose to think that way. I didn't choose to beat myself up for, not being perfect. So now it's time to really acknowledge that I have power over those thoughts, and I can choose new ones.
And I think that's, that's a topic right there that fits both men and women, because learning to trust ourselves and turn off the internal tape recorder from, whether it be teachers, parents, or children, bully children that may have said something that hurt you to your core. Turning that off is a very powerful tool, and it's something that it takes a long process, because the one thing about it is it can always come back. And I don't think most people realize that. They think I've gotten through it, so it's done. It'll never affect me again. So what do you think has helped you learn to trust yourself more, besides, I understand the life coaching, but I mean, is there something internally that finally has made you say, I got this. I understand where I am. I understand who I am.
Well, something that I took not from Zendik itself, but from my reflection on the experience, was to trust the wisdom of the body. When I got there, I had various visceral reactions that I ignored, and what I understood in retrospect was that I am a storyteller, and my mind can always come up with stories that will make things make sense. I can always justify, I can always find connective tissue, but my body will tell me what is really going on. And I think that although that's absolutely a work in progress, just that very basic knowing has helped me a lot to center myself and ground myself. And a corollary to that, just sort of a homing mechanism, that I've been using for the past 17 years is crying. So when I was a kid, I used to cry uncontrollably when something didn't, like I didn't get 100 on a test and I thought it was unfair, and I would just cry, and I couldn't stop. And I was very embarrassed about it. I didn't want to be doing it, but I couldn't stop. And at Zendik, I cried copious tears, dramatic crying fits very often as well. And after I left, I realized that, especially at Zendik when I was crying, but also I think when I was a kid, crying in that uncontrollable way, I wasn't crying because I was sad or disappointed. I was crying because I was furious. And I was furious because I didn't have control. I didn't have my sovereignty. And after I left Zendik, I largely stopped doing that kind of crying. But over the years, I would notice that kind of crying show up every now and then. And then I would know, okay, Helen, there's some way that you're giving your power away, and you better pay attention to that. And you'll know that you have gotten to the heart of that matter when you stop crying in that way.
It makes sense. It's kind of like the I'm sorry. The I'm sorry. I have in the past had a propensity when I have been worn down enough, I will start apologizing even though I have nothing to be sorry for. Mm-hmm. So just like your tears, it's the same thing. It's kind of one of those things where now as an adult, you look back and go, wait a second, what am I sorry for? Mm-hmm. So how was your relationship with your parents when you came out of this cult?
Yeah, so my father, I had never been super close to him. He had made an effort to keep in touch with me when I was at Zendik, but I wasn't super close to him before or during or after. Eventually, I got in touch with him and we ended up getting along okay. But my mother really played a much bigger role in the whole experience. She came to visit me a couple times when I was there. And throughout my time there, even though I was very emotionally shut off from her and would just bullshit her when she called me on the phone and not tell her anything real, she just kept reminding me that she was there. And there was one time about halfway through my time at Zendik, I left for a couple months and got into a bad situation of being sexually assaulted while hitchhiking. And I was, alone at night and needed someone to talk to. And I just knew, like in this animal instinctual kind of way, like, do not call Zendik Farm. They do not care about you. They will not empathize. But I could call my mother, and I called her. And then after I left, I hitchhiked away from the farm in West Virginia. I had $10 in my backpack. That was, that's what I had. And I thought I would go to California because it was warmer out there. So I was hitchhiking and I got a ride with a truck driver, and he at one point just handed me his cell phone and he said, call your mother. Yes. And so I did. And I think that what my mother did absolutely right in terms of, a parent with a child in a cult or a similar situation is she just kept reminding me that she was there. And so I knew when I left, even though I did not go back to Brooklyn, it took me a while to get back there. I didn't go back to her right away. I did know that she was there. I knew that I had help and someone I could rely on. And I also knew that her love for me was unconditional, whereas the Zendik's love was not.
And that's a great thing to know, though. I mean, having that support system, even though you didn't rush right back, having the knowledge that to know somebody is there is everything sometimes. That's all you need to keep you going. Mm-hmm. So is there another book you're working on? I mean, I know you're writing blog posts on your website.
Yeah, I am working on a second book. This one is a novel. It was inspired by my 7-year career as a college application essay editor. So the book, it's set in 2024, and the protagonist is a college application essay editor who has the chance to swing the presidential election by strategically revising and then leaking the application essay of the Republican candidate's son. So, and there's a Scottish versus English subplot. I am both Scottish. I'm Scottish and English and Irish by heritage, but I'm so much more interested in being Scottish than being English. And recently I've gotten very into all things Scottish, and I'm fascinated by, the age-old animosity between the Scots and the English. So the Republican candidate, the antagonist, he's English, and the protagonist is Scottish, and that's part of their beef with each other. And the other party, the opposing party, is called Dirt First, and it's about air, water, soil, and relationships.
Okay, sounds interesting. So going back to your college essay reviewer, you had to run across some interesting essays. I'm sure a lot were boring and standard boilerplate, but I'm sure there were some that were just kind of crazy to read.
Well, I wasn't reviewing them, I was editing them.
Okay.
I was rewriting them. And I mean, it's really, if I were to remember any essays in particular, it would be because they were bad, because they were spectacularly bad. Yeah, that's the lot of the editor as opposed to the
reviewer. Yeah, I get you. I apologize for misconstruing. So, do you live on like a lot of property now still, and do you do your own farming and own gardening and everything else?
Well, I live in Beacon, New York, in the Hudson Valley, which is just north of New York City, on 0.23 acres with my husband. We have an orchard and we grow some food. We haven't been here for that long. We've been here for a few years. I'm still in the process of getting to know the land and what things want to grow where. So I would say we kind of have a homestead. We have a wood stove, and cook with wood and compost, and we actually have a human manure set up, so we're able to safely turn our own poop and pee into fertilizer, which is a wonderful way to close the loop. So yeah, it's very much a work in progress. And we're in a city. We're in a very small city, so it's not like being in a rural area. But we certainly, we're doing our best to turn our home into a locus of production as opposed to just consumption.
I have never heard of composting that way. I mean, we have a compost bin at the house here, but I've never heard of composting your own waste. So that's definitely something I've never been aware of.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And there's no health risk to that. I'm trying to educate myself here.
So. Oh, absolutely. Totally understandable. Yeah. Whether there's a health risk or not totally depends on how you handle the situation. I mean, and the commonly what people do when turning human poop into fertilizer is just like let it sit for a year or preferably 2 years. And if you do that, pretty much any critter that might have posed a problem is going to die. Another thing you can do is you can hot compost. You can get your pile really hot, and that will also kill any problematic critters. But I've had extensive experience with this at Earth Haven, with a 2-part system involving a bucket toilet and then outdoor corrals where everything rots. And I mean, I've taken a handful of finished compost from one of these corrals and like stuck my nose in it, and it smells incredible. I mean, basically all you have to do, some precautions, but all you have to do is just let it sit long enough and it will become the most amazing soil.
I mean, my husband, because he used to garden, he would sit there and we would buy either mushroom compost or regular, manure compost. And of course, manure compost comes with weeds. Nobody thinks about that. It's like, why are there weeds? Well, that's why, because cows eat grass and grass ends up, in the digestive tract. So I guess in a way you wouldn't be having that problem.
Well, that's true.
It's very true. So are you a vegetarian as well, or?
No, I am not a vegetarian at all. I have been vegan and I have been vegetarian, but at the moment I am very much an eater of animal foods, and I am extremely particular about where they come from, how the animals were raised. I don't want to eat beef unless the animals ate only grass. For me, I mean, not just with choices about animal food, but choices about any food and about clothing and about building materials. It's all about the ingredients, where they came from, the effect that they had on the web of life in the place that they came from, and the effect that they'll have, on me and in transit and so on.
Well, that's smart. I mean, today I got a recall notice on a CPAP machine, something that you use to sleep with every night. And apparently this recall came out in June. I got the notice today in October that you're supposed to immediately stop using it. But it goes back to what you're saying. What was in the machine that has now caused this recall?
Yeah.
So I mean, by sticking with more natural things, we're lessening the fact that recall, we're not going to harm the world as much. So is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, the theme of your podcast is the question of whether it was better to have done X or not done it. So I mean, I said this to you when I first got in touch with you, but just, as far as entering Zendik and spending that time there, I don't regret it at all. I still think I think of it as this sort of inflection point in my life, the sort of before and after, and I think of it as this incredibly rich source of fertilizer.
And that's smart, because that way it keeps things going in a positive sense for you, looking back with no regrets. And I mean, I didn't ask the better two question because I figured you have put a positive spin on it. So it's a good thing. I will put your links and information in the show notes. And I thank you so much for your time and sharing your story, Helen.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate it.
Wow. Helen's story. What can I say? Being in a cult is not necessarily what one would suspect, but, some of the things that we think we know about him seem to be true from what she said. Her story was quite an interesting story, and one that I think people should be made aware of. We should pay attention to the fact that when something doesn't seem right in our gut, we need to really listen to it and trust it, because as she said, when she got there, things just felt off, but she stayed. And she wanted to believe in the message. Sometimes the need to believe in something when we have no tether, as she said, kind of makes us susceptible to predators. So stay safe. And, if you want to check out her book is called Mating in Captivity. And I will have links in the notes for you to check her website out as well as her book. And I have to say, thank you so much for listening. The podcast, like I said before, many a times, it's something that I'm really passionate about it, and I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful to have it in my life. If you like the podcast, remember to subscribe. You can subscribe on Apple. You can subscribe on any podcast service that you like to listen to. That way you're always up to date on the episodes. We're also on YouTube, and you can leave a thumbs up, subscribe, anything you care to do there, leave a comment, and definitely I will reach out and answer those comments. If you want to send me an email, you can do so by sending an email to Donna at thebetter2podcast.com. That's DAUNA at thebetter2podcast.com. Anyway, I thank you as always for tuning in. and your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. So have a wonderful day. Take care and catch you next time. Bye. You're listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needham.